May I have your attention, please? I have the honor to introduce our next presenter and speaker, who is going to address a topic that I think most of us here know very little about a people that are kind of hidden from us in just about all parts of the world, because they only visit us for a short period of time and continue to move on. They are people that are definitely on the move at all times, and they are the people that live in the maritime world, seafarers, and those that derive their living from the sea, from the water, that are always away from the land where most of us live. And the church has been always concerned about these people, because so many share our faith, and so many have great needs, and they look often to Our Lady Star of the Sea to be their guiding star, their hope in their life, to keep them close to God. And so today, His Eminence Cardinal DiNardo, who is the Archbishop of Galveston-Houston, is a member of the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant People. And he is the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' newly elected Vice President. On November 12th of 2013, Cardinal DiNardo was elected Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, along with its new President, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of Louisville. Cardinal DiNardo is the second Archbishop of Galveston-Houston. He is the spiritual leader of more than 1.3 million Catholics. The Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston has the largest number of Catholics of the 15 dioceses of Texas. And I would add also one of the largest seaports in the United States that carries the most cargo and merchandise of any seaport throughout this country. In recognition of this growing faith community in the Galveston-Houston area and a lifetime of Catholic leadership, he was appointed to the College of Cardinals by Pope Benedict XVI in 2007, making him the first Cardinal Archbishop from the southern United States in both his own archdiocese and as a member of the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Culture. Cardinal DiNardo is known for his constant efforts to unite a multicultural, multilingual flock of Christian faithful to live out the gospel with passion and enthusiasm. Cardinal DiNardo studied for the priesthood at St. Paul's Seminary and earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in philosophy from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He went on to receive theological degrees from the Pontifical North American College in Rome, where he later taught. Cardinal DiNardo was ordained to the priesthood for the Diocese of Pittsburgh in 1977. He worked for the Congregation of Bishops in Rome from 1984 to 1991. Then he returned to Pittsburgh to again be a parish priest. In 1997, Cardinal DiNardo was appointed Bishop of the Diocese of Sioux City, Iowa. He became coadjutor bishop of the Galveston-Houston Archdiocese in March of 2004. And when Archbishop Emeritus Joseph Fiorenza retired in 2006, the Pope appointed Daniel DiNardo as Archbishop, and on November 24, 2007, elevated him to become the first ever Cardinal of Texas. Cardinal DiNardo served on the board of the National Catholic Partnership for Persons with Disabilities, a position to which he brings a certain empathy, contending as he does with significant hearing losses in both ears. He also serves on the board of directors of Catholic University, is an advisor to the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, is a member of the Pontifical Council for Migrants and Refugees, and is part of the ad hoc committee to oversee the use of the Catechism for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He is the chair of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Pro-Life Activities. With no further ado, I present to you His Eminence Cardinal DiNardo.
Thanks, Father John. Thank you very much. Also want to thank Father John for his kind hospitality exercised in your name. I never realized how large DePaul University is. 25,000 students. I mean, even for Texas, that's big. By the way, we've got Texas weather here today. Isn't that wonderful? It's a beautiful day out here in Chicago. Dear friends, Psalm 107. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. He summoned the gale up to heavens and down again. Their skill was at an end. Then they cried to the Lord in their need, and he saved them from all distress, and he brought them to their desired haven. Mariners and seafarers have always been with us in human culture. Their work brings us goods. Mariners are also very biblical, and we hear about them all the time. After all, isn't the opening of the book of Genesis about the Tahu Webahu and all the chaos of the waters? And we've always been trying to speak a logos over that. The first apostles were fishermen, and accounts of Jesus on the waters are part of the understanding of his very identity. Jesus calmed the sea, and at one point he even gave advice to Peter to put out for a catch, a command that proved to be semi-miraculous and good for business as well. However you want to interpret business there. Pastoral care for seafarers is mentioned by St. Paul in the Acts of the Apostles. The role of the sea in evangelization has been a constant ever since the very religious but pagan mariners in the book of Jonah threw him over the boat because he wasn't paying attention to God. Care for mariners and seafarers, however, has not always been a priority. But as one chaplain in Houston told me, ships are floating communities and communities of faith. It is with that background that I am here to give a presentation on a form of immigration, migrants, seafarers, mariners, people on the move. And because this is a particular ministry of great intensity in my own Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. It is not because I have many academic credentials on this or even comprehensive knowledge on the subject, but I do have genuine pastoral concern about this issue owing to the very fact that I was sent to Houston. Houston is a major city of immigrants from almost every part of the earth. Though not like LA, we only celebrate Mass in 16 languages every weekend in Houston, where they celebrate in maybe 40 or 50. Nevertheless, the Independent Houston School District does utilize 50 languages. Houston is becoming very, very much a United Nations kind of city. But my topic concerns not these immigrants, but the seafarers, a person on the move. Persons always in diaspora, but who want to be gathered. DePaul celebrates World Catholicism Week, and the theme of the Conference of Scattered and Gathered Catholics in Diaspora is a beautiful theme. Seafarers are truly an image of world Catholicism because they are constantly scattered and regathered, not just at their home port and nation, but also around the planet. Seafarers are a particular and distinctive form of what we can truly say is diaspora. They love the sea, mariners, but they always also yearn for a home port. Houston has been a city of destination for immigrants for a while. Mexico, Central, and South America provide the largest numbers. In fact, the Latino Catholics count for over 40% of our Catholic population right now. We also have a very large number of people who come from Asia and Africa, some of whom have been involved in the maritime industry. We have 135,000 Vietnamese, 38,000 of whom are Catholic, and over 150,000 people from the Philippines live in the city of Houston. And it may sound like it's a stereotype, but I must confess, I think all of them work in the medical field in Houston. Thousands from Korea, China, a parish that we have that has to speak both Mandarin and Cantonese. Huge numbers from India, 70,000 Nigerians, because Nigeria is the oil capital of Africa. Many other African nations. Dr. Stephen Kleinberg of Rice University has said that if you actually follow the demographics for Houston, that Houston is the United States in the year 2040. His data is astonishing about what has happened to this particular Texas city that is so international. And one of the reasons for the growth in Houston is the Port of Houston and the Houston Ship Channel, built decades ago after the 1900 famous hurricane in Galveston. Galveston was reticent to accept this. Houston went ahead anyway, and it's fascinating to note that by the 1950s, the Port of Houston had overpowered the Port of Galveston. The channel that opens into the Gulf of Mexico from the Houston Ship Channel, this area is so huge and so vast, it's remarkable. There are other major ports, by the way, in the USA, some 62 of them affecting 50 different dioceses, whether along the East Coast, the Gulf, or the West Coast. But the largest port in tonnage each year now is Houston. A fascinating thing that has taken place over the last 10 years. Almost 1,000 ships come through the Port of Houston each month. And the number of barges that came through 2 years ago was over 25,000. That's 2,000 barges a month. There are as many as 75,000 mariners who come through Houston each year. The port chaplain tells me he has the largest parish in the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. If you were to add all the local port and dock workers, the maritime industry executives and workers, it becomes a sizable group of people that inhabit the area of the Port of Houston on any given day and any given year. Let me add another interesting statistic. A few years back, maybe 2008, 60% of all seafarers in the world, and here I'm speaking about the crews on ships, were either Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. This is explained by the countries from whence most mariners originate: the Philippines, Central and South America, Eastern Europe, and the Hong Kong area around China. The origin of the Seafarer Center in Houston goes back to 1968 and the initial growth of the port. Mariners came in and then left ship and landed on the east side of town in Houston, frequently ended in trouble, not knowing the city, and indeed violence was frequently done to them, and I suppose they gave it back. A young, recently ordained priest at the time, his name, I'm not making this up, sisters and brothers, Father Rivers Patu is his name. It sounds like somebody who should be in the shipping business, doesn't it? Or on the sea. Rivers Patu, born in Galveston, raised up in northwest of Houston. And if you saw him, though, he is a graduate of Notre Dame and a very articulate man. If you saw him, he looks like somebody that just came down a riverboat. White clerical shirt, colored suspenders, gray pants, and God knows what color shoes. He makes quite a spectacle in the Port of Houston since 1968. In any case, in 1968, this young priest of the Archdiocese became interested in the plight of the seafarers. He worked with other Christian denominations and responded to a call by the port officials and a captain of a Belgian frigate who came and said, "Why isn't there some common ministry for seafarers in Houston?" The Archdiocese helped set things in motion by a $50,000 check. This was followed by other denominations offering financial assistance, and within a few years, a major seafarers center was opened right at the port and in the heart of the Port of Houston. It provided, of course, a chapel, pastoral care, but it also provided something else: a restaurant, a grill, a place to talk and read, to receive cards for phone calls home, psychological and spiritual counseling, a place of safety, a place to play billiards, a swimming pool. Father Patou was named the head chaplain of the Seafarers ministry by an ecumenical group which consisted of the various denominations and also members of the Port of Houston. He has been the head of the Seafarers ministry to this day. Imagine being involved in a ministry for 47 years. There are other chaplains assigned of diverse faiths, some full-time, some part-time. We have 2 other priests who assist as chaplains, and they're there because they know multiple languages. We have 1 Polish priest, and I must say this for the Polish people. I've never seen anyone who knows so many Slavic languages. He's very important in the port. We have a number of our permanent deacons, as well as deacons from other denominations who work in the port. Lay chaplains of various Christian groups, and a whole host of volunteers. The center has developed an extremely fine pastoral formation program to train chaplains and to train volunteers, one that has been imitated by other seafarers centers, even throughout the world. The center in the heart of the Port of Houston is easily accessed. Before 9/11, it was frequented by as many as 200 sailors a night. When I first arrived in Houston 10 years ago, within 2 months of my arrival, Father Patou gave me a command that I had to go through a major tour of the Port of Houston and the Houston Ship Channel, which I did. The sheer expanse and mega character of everything in the port was stunning to me, even though I grew up in Pittsburgh and remember riverboats. The inlets to the oil and gas sections and the refineries nearby are mega. Of course, Houston is a big oil capital. The sections where various cargoes let out and restock the ships were all enormous. Most of the goods on ships that come down the Mississippi River now come to Houston. And that's because New Orleans isn't what it was before. So it all comes to Houston. In addition, most ships that go through the Panama Canal are now, which by the way is being enlarged, the Panama Canal, end up coming also through Houston. A few years ago, I christened a ship that spends all its time doing nothing else but refueling ships in the Houston Ship Channel. It was the most sophisticated equipment, and it was huge. The crew, which is local to Houston, is on board for 6-7 days at a time in the channel, even though they might have homes in Houston. They are indeed themselves seafarers and mariners. A few minutes ago, I mentioned 9/11 because Homeland Security and the Port of Houston instituted new security procedures in the wake of what happened, 9/11. This has contributed to the lessening of sailors who come to the Seafarers Center. They simply cannot get off their ships anymore. At one time, a port security agent could give a general visa for all mariners of a ship to leave the ship at port. That is now individualized. It has become quite expensive, and many shipping companies will not pay for all of the expenses involved in the paperwork and security clearance to allow a mariner, a seafarer, to get off ship and come into port. From 200 mariners a night at the Seafarer Center, sometimes now they only see 25 a night. This has caused a change in the orientation for the work of seafarer chaplains and volunteers, even though they've gone on ships from the beginning. Now, most of the work is to go on board the ships, and that means all the chaplains and volunteers have to have the necessary clearance and paperwork. A burdensome thing, but what the Seafarer Center does voluntarily and enthusiastically, so that all of their chaplains and volunteers can go on board ships. The new result is a constant need for chaplains and trained volunteers to go on the multiple ships that come into port every day. It should also be noted that there's another problem in terms of sailors and mariners able to get off ship at port, and that is the sheer efficiency in technology that allows ships now to come to port, remove their goods, take on more goods, and be back off into sea in less than 24 hours. The shipping business likes this a lot. It increases productivity. What it does to the human element of the mariners, though, is quite another tale. Houston is an oil and gas economy, and the ships with these goods are a most constant presence, and their turnaround time in port is meant to be very quick. In all of this, the pastoral and human needs of the mariners and sailors remain, and they need to be cared for. Let me fill out one aspect about boarding ships with a kind of story. Each year, I go to the Seafarers Center near the feast of St. Nicholas, December 6th, the patron of mariners. There is a large celebration by all the staff, the chaplains, and all of the volunteers who work at the Seafarers Center at the port. There is also a blessing of individual Christmas packages for each mariner who comes to the Port of Houston between mid-December and January 7th. This past year, almost 22,000 packages were prepared by volunteers and made ready for individual trips to ships for mariners who obviously couldn't get off ship. It's quite a work of Christmas generosity and good cheer. For some sailors on long voyages, it may be the only Christmas gift they received. You should be mindful that some of the ships that come into Houston, those sailors are on the ship for 7 months before they ever get back home. The process of getting the packages begins in October and involves thousands of donors and hundreds of wrappers. It is a floor-to-wall takeover of the Seafarers Center by massive numbers of gifts. In my own archdiocese, the Council of Catholic Women, Knights of Columbus, and many other groups get involved. What a beautiful display it is. Last year at the Mass, one of the priests present was called out right before we began, and he missed all the festivities. The reason was he was asked to board a ship where a mariner had suffered a heart attack and died. The trauma to the crew, as you can imagine, is very great since it's unexpected. As priest, he went to minister to the crew to console the grief-stricken. As a member of the port, too, he had to get in touch through the proper protocols with the family in the Philippines. Very detailed. Hours of work, what to do to bring the body back to the Philippines. This kind of work is not unusual for all the chaplains in the Port of Houston. The workload of chaplains, both Catholic and non-Catholic, includes some distinctive responsibilities. There's a constant need to check for magazines and religious literature in multiple languages, since some of the only religious contact they'll have is if somebody gives them something to either read or think about. There is a huge need and a huge availability of Bibles in multiple languages. And when chaplains go on ship, they bring all that with them. It's kind of like a new edition of Carpetbaggers. So they bring all kinds of stuff when they go with them on ship. Asking for donations to the center for anything from jigsaw puzzles to videos are a regular feature of major chaplaincy work and of any volunteer. Chaplains at the port also need to get or try to get shore passes for seafarers. This is a corporal work of mercy in the port to try to get that, to try to plead with captains of ships. Why is that important? Because the isolation is so great. To get somebody off ship is very helpful when they come into a port. The procedures also for money exchanges and money transfers are one of the most important duties learned at the center. You might say, why? But think about it. How important that would be when you come into port. Perhaps the most human dimension of the center's work deals with phones, landline use, cell phones, recharging of mobile devices, A special taxi service provided to a shopping center if you do get off ship so you can buy something. Desktop computers and access to the internet is also highly asked for by the mariners who are allowed to leave ship and come to the center. Now, that does not mean traditional acts of chaplaincy are minus or missing. Counseling and support for mariners in difficulty is provided day and night. There are worship celebrations in the chapel every night from various Christian denominations and others. Mass is offered regularly during the week and also on Sundays. A chaplain's team goes out each day to visit as many ships as possible in the Port of Houston. The same is true now for the Port of Galveston, though the Galveston port is basically cruise ships now. May I add, there's been a recent change in cruise ships. The workers on board those ships are no longer considered hotel workers. They are now considered truly seafarers, which is an improvement. Chaplains, beyond carrying material for religious services and conducting religious services. May I add, because so many of the mariners are either Roman Catholic or Orthodox, some of our chaplains, the priests when they go on, or the permanent deacons, try to do either Mass or a communion service. Priests try to also hear confessions. Unfortunately, we do have some Orthodox, but it's not as well as it might be because the Orthodox priest can't really celebrate the Divine Liturgy on board ship. So you have to find ways for those who want the sacraments to have access to them. So the chaplains do come. We have a number who are various Protestant denominations. They'll do interdenominational services. We try to do something religious on board if the sailors cannot get off. But at the same time, while they're there for religious services, they always carry phone cards and top-up cards, and also are always ready to have a free taxi service for the seafarers who really want to get off ship. What else do they do? This is more delicate. Once on board, the chaplains can also become a means to report problems to the port or to the Coast Guard where issues arise on ships, rather than to have the mariner himself report it and perhaps lose his job. I'll have more on this later. Chaplains have access to other religious bodies. We have now a growing number of Buddhist, Hindu seafarers, and they can bring a local minister or a religious leader on board ship, if need be, to attend to those religious needs. One of the great things about the Seafarer Center in Houston is genuinely ecumenical, even if the Roman Catholic presence is very intense. Chaplains work on board ships also to bring reconciliation between crew members of various cultures or nations who are feuding. This has become an increasing problem as more and more ships may have the flag of one nation, but it's nothing but a foil. And in fact, the crew on board is multicultural, and the tensions that arise, as you can imagine, when in between ports you have 30 days to live with somebody and fights and things arise. You need someone who can deal with conciliation, and that's what the chaplains do a lot when they go on board ships. One other thing, which perhaps seems minor, but is very important. Chaplains also have a service at the Seafarers Center that they can write letters to families of seafarers who maybe don't have all the technological access, but need to write something heartfelt to the families at home. Dealing with family stress at home and while you're on deck on a ship is one of the most important part of the pastoral work of chaplains with individual mariners. The Apostleship of the Sea. Let me say a word about that. It is an international Catholic maritime organization founded in Glasgow, Scotland in 1920 with the blessing of Pope Pius XI. Its work eventually was included in the Pontifical Council for Migrants and Peoples on the Move. Its work is to encourage and engage in the same kind of activities that I've just outlined that are done at the Houston Ship Channel. In fact, at a meeting in Rome of the AOS, or the Apostleship of the Sea, in 2012, the Houston port was singled out not only for its pastoral work and ecumenical sensitivity, but also for something else which Houston Port does. It does a formation program for chaplains and volunteers, and yes, even for seminarians. May I say, we also make sure in Houston that a large number of our permanent deacons have some formation in the port. One of our success stories was a permanent deacon who didn't like it when he was first told he had to go to the port for part of his pastoral preparation. He's now the biggest advocate, and we can't keep him out of the Seafarers Center. He's so intense about the needs that are there. Great success stories there. But the Apostleship of the Sea, beyond these things, does other things. It helps to work on certification and vetting of chaplains for ship cruises. I'm not going to enter into that particular work. But lastly, it also engages in advocacy. And it is this theme that I would like to examine with you now. To do this, I need to speak at least briefly about the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. It is the last of a series of conventions, and by here we mean legal instruments, ratified internationally by most or all countries with maritime industries, establishing better working conditions and assigning responsibilities for the world's seafarers. The group most responsible for seeing this through in the past has been the International Labor Organization, which dates back to 1919 and handles international labor agreements. It has been concerned with maritime issues since its founding, and its home is in Geneva. The Maritime Labor Convention has been called, the one from 2006, the Seafarers' Bill of Rights, since its goals are decent and safe work and decent and safe working conditions for mariners, and also to establish a level playing field for quality ship owners. Both the Apostleship of the Sea and the ILO have a shared interest in this Bill of Rights, a collaboration that goes back to the post-World War I and World War II economic situation and the intense human costs of rapid economic growth, industrialization, globalization, and the extreme increase of international trade and carrying it with it the movements of peoples. It is important to note that the ILO, which is a secular organization, has shown great interest in Catholic social teaching, that the human person is the basis of human labor, and thus labor is not just a commodity. Mariners have a right to develop, this is according to the ILO, not only their material well-being, but also their spiritual well-being. It's quite important to mention when you look at these conventions and what we're up against in the maritime industry. There have been many accords and conventions for the shipping industry and seafarers because the industry is global. The tempo of the signing of accords increased in the middle and late 20th century. In fact, there have been 42 such accords since 1920. But in 2001, something special happened. There was an important meeting in Geneva that resulted in 5 years of work and negotiations toward what became the 2006 Maritime Labor Convention, set to go completely into operation by August 20th, 2013, which means last year in August, all of the accord is now supposed to be in operation. It has been signed by more than 60% of nations which have maritime industries. The constituents to this accord, governments, ship owners, maritime industry, and seafarers, wanted the widest possible acceptability, that the convention be updated at regular intervals, that it be dedicated to principles of what the convention calls always decent work, and lastly, that it be enforceable, which has always been one of the issues in maritime industry. Minimum standards for the well-being of seafarers, human standards, ones that are enforceable. This is the crux of the 2006 Maritime Convention. That legal instrument involves global agreements on recruiting and training mariners, particularly watching that those under age are excluded until they reach the proper age. avoiding exploitation of seafarers, especially now where mariners of different nations and cultures are working on the same ship. Working conditions for mariners are important, and by the way, a new twist is now added. Seafarers now are bearing responsibility for environmental incidents. We see this in the news over the last few years. In addition, with faster port times and increased efficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, the conventions note a growing problem of the spiritual and social isolation of crews. This implies that there is a need for crews to be able to disembark at ports. The Convention of 2006 replaces 37 former conventions and official recommendations for the international maritime industry. The question that has been asked, is this a paper tiger? Some of the current leaders of the convention and legal analysts say much depends on the work of groups like AOS, Houston Ship Channel, Seafarer Ministry, and other welfare organizations. Their initiatives and their advocacy helps the countries that ratify the accord to implement it, and these groups can also put pressures on other nations. An example brought to my attention recently was that the accord stipulated that you have to provide medical examinations for mariners and seafarers, and indeed that you have to allow specific, well-documented times for rest on board and for occupational safety. Most striking is the requirement of the 2006 document of making provisions by regulation and standards for access to shore-based facilities for seafarers' welfare. There is much leeway given as to how this is accomplished, but the very presence of such a standard now is welcome news indeed. The Convention of 2006 relies on private, social, or religious groups to be of help in this matter. And for us in Houston, this is important. Father Patou and others like him have been advocates for seafarers for many years and welcome these developments. Chaplains have become a resource for the complaints of timid mariners, afraid to register their genuine complaints about working conditions. The advocacy of religious and other social networks can now have a place in a more upfront way. The organization of crews on ships is very hierarchical, and each mariner knows his or her place. It does also remain true that there is a certain passivity that emerges among seafarers, and an attitude of fatalism is not uncommon among mariners, particularly given the vicissitudes of nature and weather that are always near. In addition, there is always fear and anxiety over job security. Some years ago, Father Patou told me he boarded a Romanian vessel where the conditions on board were absolutely deplorable, and he wanted to go to the Coast Guard about it. No seafarer complained, nor did they want him to register any complaint. They made $30 a month, and they still made more than anybody in Romania. Says something about why they were so frightened about saying anything. You have to hand it to Father Patou. He had a way of raising questions so that perhaps they could at least fix the bathrooms on board the ship. And Father Patou comes across as someone who plays golf with maritime industry. He knows everybody, he's kind of like a politician, but he is absolutely merciless when something happens that is unfair to seafarers. I still remember him telling me a story about the famous Niet of a Russian captain that wouldn't let him on board a Russian ship. And Niet never means anything to Father Patou, no. He said, the Russian captain, you can't come on board, it was Christmas time, because you have this huge amount of gifts. You can't come, you're not allowed. He said, besides, we don't have any gifts to give you. Patou never missed a beat. He said, I bet you have vodka. I love vodka. Can I have a drink with you? The captain was taken aback. Patou got on board. He drank vodka with the guy for a while. After a bit, he relented. and the captain allowed the gifts to come on ship to his sailors. As I say, Father Patu knows when he can be relentless. The advocacy network of various religious groups involved in maritime work may be frustrating. It requires great patience, but in the best sense, it is what Jesus would do insofar as the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy are part and parcel of port life in very simple and straightforward ways, but very telling ways. The work does bear fruit, as the 2006 convention in its numerous regulations about seafarer standards on ships attests, because of the work of groups like the AOS, the ILO, and the Ship Channel in Houston. May I add one other comment about a recent phenomena that has seafarers very, very nervous right now and very anxious. And they bring that with them when they come to port. And that is the phenomenon of piracy, particularly since 2002 in various areas of the world. And since piracy and the hijacking of ships is always present with Houston, because so many of the ships that are coming to Houston come through dangerous areas as international ships. This is shown in the way the sailors and the mariners react and their concerns they bring. In the areas around Somalia, the Gulf of Aden near Yemen, South China Sea, parts of the Indian Ocean, vast territory, there has been an increase up till 2012. Because of military interventions and other things, that number of incidents has decreased. But I must tell you something, friends. You will rarely hear of the attack of pirates on a ship. Occasionally you will. Why won't they advertise it? Because if you're a genuine pirate, that's good news. You can up the ante for how much you're requesting in terms of money. So most ships and most governments will not say much when a ship is attacked. But you can imagine the effect that this has, however, on the sailor and his family. As a matter of law, it is legal to pay a pirate who is a criminal. It is not legal to pay ransom to a terrorist. The line between the two is gray indeed at times. This is what we're facing in international shipping industry. Grateful that some of this has gone down, but as a lawyer in London told us at a big convention about the maritime industry, that companies today would rather pay off, but it takes a long time. And my interest here is not all the ins and outs relative to piracy. My interest here is to look at the human element. Someone who has been captured by pirates, the tendency is to remove the crew from the leadership of the crew. Therefore, there's no captain. And pirate crews, since they have this hierarchical way, they tend to fall apart. In fact, there was one crew that did well. Why? Because they elected the cook to be their spokesperson when the captain was taken away. We have serious issues with families. Trauma would be true when anyone is attacked. But we don't always hear what happens in the maritime industry. And so part of what I'm here is I'm trying to be an advocate in this little talk that I give. That the maritime industry is global, it's huge. The people who work the sea are like any people. There's lots of them that are of Christian belief. They do not have regular access to a religious sacramental life. And when they come on port, this is where we can meet them. This is where we can give them some solace, support, encouragement, counseling. All these are necessary. And where there's piracy, where the after effects after they're freed, we can deal and help them in terms of their families. In the last 6 months, I brought a new secretary, personal secretary, priest, it's a priest of my archdiocese, on board. He's Filipino, and his dad is a seafarer. I asked him if he would give me a few comments, and he said the following. Many people overlook the fact that the life of seafarers is a variety of generational and cultural gaps, and it's very hard. And none of them are trained how to do this. And that perhaps the Seafarer Center and things like it can help them when they're there in conciliation. As I mentioned earlier, that's exactly what some of our chaplains do. He also said that many people have the notion that when mariners leave ship and go on and go into the town, or they go to a center, that they're interested in drinking and drugs, violence, and women. And he said that's simply not true much anymore. Not true at all. Most who come in, they're looking for some comfort and solace and just away from ship. One of the things that happens on ship all the time is boredom or terror. And what they need is human solidarity and comfort, which the Christian gospel can give. This priest, whose father is in the Navy vessels, also said something that I'd never thought of before. He said, there's no sense necessarily of day or night or season when you're on a ship. You just don't have that experience. And he said, therefore, the whole sense of living even a liturgical life, or living a life that we would humanly say we would do always in port, he said, just doesn't happen. And therefore, with all the risks at sea, the development of a spiritual life of mariners is pretty important. He also said, like military families, we families who have husbands, fathers, brothers on the sea, we face constant worry about our loved ones who are in dangerous parts of the world. The world battling piracy, the world battling economics, that's all part of us every day. He said, it's an interesting, beautiful life, but also very tough. I would agree with him. In the 10 years that I had been in Galveston-Houston and listening to the stories of the chaplains, and also occasionally of the mariners who I see when they come to port, that the stressors of maritime life and the vulnerabilities are there. The outreach we do in the Seafarer Center and other Seafarer Centers throughout the United States and the world is an extremely important way to help people who are on the move constantly recognize, as the Psalm says, that eventually they can come home, that there is a port of home, and that there is a welcome when they come home. Many sailors, when they get off ship, go to towns and there's no one to welcome them. It's impersonal. One of the things I think that the Christian, Catholic, any dimension of religious life can do is to help people be at home and know they are genuinely human persons. This is pretty much my talk for this evening. Read it through. I am very open and receptive to any questions or comments you might have. I opened up my talk with the Psalm 107. May I say that for all the variety of immigration and things we have in the Archdiocese, one of the sectors that gets a great response from my people for our yearly, what we call our DSF fund, every diocese has something like that, where you take funds and use for the various programs in the diocese. Many people donate their funds precisely to the ship channel every year and for its ministry, because I think they realize how important it is for the mariners. They make our life in Houston possible in many ways. It's a huge economy. But we can't forget them, their humanity, their spiritual desires and aspirations. Thank you for your kind attention and listening to me today.
We have a little time now to ask the Cardinal some questions about this ministry or any other kinds of ministries to people on the move, or about what's going on in Houston and the like with the culture and diversity and the like. So if anyone would like to ask a question, if you could step up to the microphone here in the center, maybe introduce yourself and ask a question to the Cardinal about this. Don't all rush up at once now? Yeah.
Thank you, Cardinal, for your comments. Very interesting and compelling work being done. I was wondering if you might be able to comment as you spoke about advocacy on behalf of seafarers and behalf of those that work in the shipping industry, what do you think the prospects are for the church helping to renew or revitalize the labor movement in those industries, whether it's the longshoremen's unions, whether it's the seafarers unions themselves?
What I can say internationally, like the council in Rome, for migrants and whatnot who deal with some aspects of the legal concerns of workers, is very active. I must confess I don't know nationally what happens so much in the United States per se. I've been involved slightly in it because of my work in Rome and because of this maritime thing. And there's a great deal of abuse that goes on in ships. And the conditions on board of a number of ships are not good. Now, I'm not saying this is across the boards, they're not good. But many of the ships that come to ports are not good, and the working conditions are terrible. To the extent that the church can work with groups like ILO and others, I think it's worthwhile to pursue because workers are being exploited. To generalize this, whether would this happen more generally, it seems to me it's almost by sectors. For instance, in Houston, I work with some of the business contractors for immigration reform because of the terrible way subcontractors are treating immigrants who may or may not be documented in terms of pay and working conditions. We've had a series of things in Houston of during construction work of a trench being dug and caving in and someone dying. And a lot of time you discover that the subcontractors, see the major contractors, this is why this is such a problem. They will not hire, they'll be very careful what they do and follow all the instructions, but subcontractors don't. And that's how everybody passes the buck to everybody else. So I would think some stuff on labor agreements would be very crucial, particularly I would say in the South. But Doctor, I'm not well enough informed, I have to be honest with you. And I don't know that the church in general is, one time in the church with the labor union leaders was very intense. I don't think it's quite as intense now, though there's still some who are involved. That's probably all I could tell you now, Doctor, because I'm just not, I have to say, I'm just not aware of anything nationally. Yes?
Someone else? Who's going to the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Cardinal, for your presentation. So, in the discussion throughout this week, we've been talking about sort of some of the ecclesiological implications of migrants and sort of what their experience reveals to us about what it means to be a church. And so I was wondering if you could speak about what the seafarers and maritime workers reveal for the rest of us. In terms
About
of
the church?
Right.
I hate to overly generalize. I find the seafarers somewhat similar to the seafarers in the book of Jonah. They're deeply devotional. They're religious in that level. Frequently superstitious. But it's genuine devotion. Where there are Catholics, they yearn when they come in port, whether they go to the Seafarer Center or they go on board, for a celebration of the sacrament of reconciliation, let's say, or to hear the word and receive communion. They are interested in the sacramental life of the church. The second thing they bring is their sense of being on the seas. That's their job. They want to be home, and they also bring a sense of yearning for family, and frequently their families are in trouble. There's incredible amounts of stress in maritime families. It really is. So what they bring to the church is our ability to go out and reach out to them. I find that, it's a floating community of faith, if it's anything, in the maritime industry. Most of the time there is no chaplain, there's no priest, there's no minister with them on boat, unless maybe cruise ships. And so they're kind of left on their own. In the Seafarer Center, they've been trying, all the chaplains, to figure out some what we would call rudimentary forms of spiritual formation for mariners, so that they can, even when they're isolated on ship, continue to develop in some simple way their life of faith. I think the mariners bring to us the whole question, what about people who are so much on the edges, it seems, though they don't want to be, that they have no genuine daily ministration of the church as we've understood it in terms of parish or whatnot. So I find it to be a real challenge. I thank Father Rivers Patu and people like him who do this every day, and knowing their contact is 25, 30 minutes an hour with a whole group of mariners on a ship, and they may not see it for 6 months. So it's a genuine kind of evangelization that's going on there. Good news of the faith.
Another question, please.
Thank you, Cardinal, for your presentation. How are the people who live around the ports being ministered to? People who live near the ports? My students have done a study that port areas are probably environmentally impacted, and the pollution and health issues, stress issues of those who live near the ports. And I was wondering if there is a consideration of ministering to those who live near ports, especially with the environmental impact.
Father Patu is pastor of a parish right in the port, St. Alphonsus. And there's ministry because a lot of the people who live in that parish are working the port. They're basically Latinos, is what it is in Houston. And the whole east side of town is we have a series of parishes there, and some of the people who work in the port go to those parishes. I must say, right now in Houston, what's one of the major preoccupations with the ship channel? That is, I don't know if you saw 2 weeks ago, a barge in ship, 165,000 gallons of oil spilled into the ship channel near the Gulf there. So there's great concerns now about the ecology of what's going on, because there are a series of bird sanctuaries right near there on the little inlets and islands that move out towards the Gulf from the Houston ship channel. So there's lots of concern about that right now by people who live near the port. Even more intense, though, is the concern, and I'm not sure what can be done. The city of Houston and the city of Pasadena, Texas, nearby, are trying to work on it. The oil refineries are all there. And the quality of the air is, maybe I'm going to try to be neutral, leaves something to be desired. All I know is that as soon as I entered to do a confirmation in Pasadena, Texas parishes, I immediately, my eyes water, everything goes wrong. So that's an issue that both cities of Pasadena, Texas and Houston are trying to address. It's just huge. I can't even describe to you how vast the oil refining things are right near there in the Houston ship channel.
One more question.
Thank you so much, Cardinal. We've heard a lot over the last couple of days about migrants who move from one place to another place. And you minister to some of those folks, but you also minister to these people who go from place to place to place to place to place. And I'm just wondering if you've noticed any peculiar pastoral needs that the people in the second category have that the first people don't. If you could comment on the difference between.
It's a very, very fine question. And as a result, I have a very difficult trying to find a proper answer. I'm not sure because I deal with it. Maybe Father Patu and company would have something to say. One of the things he mentioned to me, though, that they bring, and it's because they work the seas, and that, like Psalm 107 says, they see the nature. They tend to be passive, fatalistic. One of the things that I believe the AOS and others have tried to do is to allow seafarers to take some responsibility and advocacy on behalf of themselves. That they become more secure, I don't know what the word is, dynamic about themselves and what they can help bring to their lives because of their understanding of who they are as a human person. They tend to be very fatalistic. I think also, if you've worked the seas for a long time, from what I understand, job security it's not great. You don't do anything to keep your job, particularly if you're the one who works in the family and provides the funds. I just keep remembering that Romanian ship crew, that would live under deplorable conditions because they got some money and that was helpful at home. Maybe they bring for us, sometimes the character of people they bring is their very vulnerability and weakness is a call for us. Do they bring with them an understanding? Maybe it's too fatalistic, but in one sense, that the Lord is going to have to care for them and others, and they have great trust. One of the chaplains, who's a Protestant, told me that the most credible person that can come on board a ship when they go into port is the chaplain. It's one of the chaplains. More than the Coast Guard, more than any of the others. If a chaplain goes on board a ship, the sailors immediately are at ease. Well, that's a great sign that the chaplains have become a sign of hope, a sign of somebody you can trust. I think that part is good. So maybe that's what they bring to us, knowing that it's the Christian faith, or whatever faith, it's the Christian faith in the sense of this respect for the human person that the sailors respond to and help us understand it.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. The Cardinal will be available during the reception and the like for any further discussion or questions you might have with him privately. I found the presentation to be so worthwhile and so significant. I am the chaplain for the AOS here in the Port of Chicago and Waukegan. And one of the reasons why there is such fear among seafarers, and many times in their timidity, is they are strangers. And what a stranger seeks is welcome. And that is why I think the role of the church, the role of all of us that care about the stranger, is to welcome the stranger. And I think that has always been so well done in Houston, and we hope in other ports throughout the world. So thank you so much, Your Eminence, for your presentation.